The other day, I came across this Instagram post about Belarus, and in it, it said that the origin of the country's name literally meant White Russia, which was the name of the area in archaic times. It was also known as Russia Alba, which we can see on this map from 1539. And in fact, a lot of countries' names date back to ancient times and the ways in which the people at the time happened to refer to it. I did a video recently on US state names origins and it did pretty well, so I thought why not do this for Europe as well. US state origins were very interesting but pretty straightforward. They're mostly either named after native groups, rivers, or European monarchs. But here in Europe, there's a little more diversity in the origins, so let's find out. I'm going to do this from west to east, sort of, but there's timestamps in the description if you don't want to sit through all of them and just skip to whichever you're interested in. Conveniently starting with my country, the westernmost of Europe, Portugal. The word Portugal derives from the Roman Celtic name Portus Cale, a city where present-day Vila Nova de Gaia now is, at the mouth of the river Douro. Portus meant port, as in harbor, and the second word, Cale, has a less clear origin. Some say it was in reference to the Kalaeci people of the northwest of the Iberian Peninsula, which would then be named the Galicians. Another theory states that Cale is a derivation of a Celtic word for port, but then the name of the area in Roman times would be Port, which doesn't make much sense. Some French scholars also believe the name may have come from Portus Gallus, meaning the port of the Gauls or Celts. I think the first hypothesis of the port of the Caelesi makes more sense. Moving on to Spain, we need to be aware that in English and some other languages, countries' names are sometimes translated. So for Spain, what we need to be looking at is the native name España. Be ready for me to mispronounce all these country names in the local languages, by the way. From what I could find, España comes from Hispania, the Roman name for the region, which in turn seems to come from the way the Phoenicians and Carthaginians called the peninsula Spania. But the meaning behind these origins is uncertain. Antonio de Nebrija, a scholar of Renaissance times, proposed that the word Hispania evolved from the ancient Iberian word Hispalis, meaning city of the Western world. Jesus Conchilos, another scholar, argued that the root of the term span is the Phoenician word spi, meaning to forge metals, and so Hispania would mean the land where metals are forged. The options are kind of endless, like a possible origin from the Basque word espana, meaning edge or border, because the peninsula is at the western edge of Europe, but, and this is oddly the most possible, it could also be a derivation of the Phoenician meaning land of rabbits, which they would write as Isfania, and actually Roman coins struck in the region during the reign of Emperor Hadrian show a female figure with a rabbit at her feet, and Greek geographer Strabo wrote about Spain, calling it indeed the land of rabbits. A strange origin for a country name, but which might actually be right. Next is a tiny country at the Spanish border, Andorra. Most of the origins of European names are uncertain. There's no official story that was certified and accepted as the certain origin in most cases. And it makes sense. While US states were named like 200 years ago, most of these countries or respective lands were named over 1,000 years ago, mostly at times when records didn't really exist. In Andorra's case, the main theory is that it derives from the name of an Iberian pre-Roman tribe, the Andesines. A Greek philosopher, Polybius, described these people as being inhabitants of the valley where Andorra is today, when writing about the passage of the Carthaginian army through the Pyrenees during the Punic Wars. His name for the locals might come from a local term itself, Andia, in Basque, which means big or giant. Another theory suggests that Andorra may derive from the Arabic Al-Dara, meaning the thickly wooded place. When the Moors conquered the Iberian Peninsula, the valleys of the Pyrenees were covered by large tracts of forest. These regions were not administered by the Moors, but this would have been the way in which they described them. In fact, the Navarro-Aragonese term Andojal also means land covered with bushes, while folk etymology states that the King Charlemagne would have named the region as a reference to the biblical valley of Andor. Going north, but still in the west, France, originally used as a way to describe the land of the Frankish Empire. The name France comes from the Latin word Francia, a word still used to describe the modern country in Italian and Spanish, translated to Frankreich in German, and equivalents in Dutch and Swedish, which all mean land or realm of the Franks. The name of the Franks itself is apparently connected to the old French word franc, meaning free or sincere, which in turn came from the medieval Latin francus, meaning as well free in the sense of free of service. A pretty cool fact, since France is usually seen as the home of modern republics, the original land of the free eventually became the land of freedom, one of the ideals of the French Revolution. Within France is Monaco. I had a pretty difficult time finding any information about this, so here's what I found. Back in the 6th century BC, Monaco was a colony of the Phocian Greeks and the Ligurians, the first inhabitants of the region, and they referred to this place as monoikos, which roughly translates to single house, transmitting the sense of a people which lived apart from others or in a single house. Monoikos is derived from a Greek word which combines the words monos, meaning alone, and oikos, which means house. According to an ancient myth, Hercules would have passed through the area and turned away the previous gods. As a result, a temple was constructed there in his honor, and being the only temple of this area, the existence of this temple, regardless of its mythological justification, might actually justify the choice of the Monoikos single house name, because it was the single temple. Before moving further east, let's go up north to cover all of these western countries. Iceland is right up there, and the name seems pretty self-explanatory. Icelandic tradition says that a Norwegian explorer named Nadod was the first Norseman to reach the island in the 9th century. He named it Snæland, or Snowland, because it was snowing, and eventually the name was adapted from snow to ice. Further down is Ireland. In Irish, the country's name is Eire, and both Ireland and Eire derive from the Old Irish Eiru. Eiru is a goddess in Irish mythology, and her name is supposed to mean something like flowing water. However, she was usually seen as a goddess of the land, and some scholars point to the origin being abundant land instead of flowing water. The Romans called the island Ibernia, a name taken from Greek geographical accounts, during his exploration of northwest Europe in 320 BC. Greek explorer Pytheas called the island Yeren, a Greek rendition of the local Celtic name Iweriu, from which the name first arose. And next to it, the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom's name is pretty straightforward. It's a United Kingdom of various countries. Although some people argue that the UK was formed in 1707 by the Act of Union between England, Wales, and Scotland, the name United Kingdom wasn't officially adopted until 1801, when Ireland was brought into the Union. Before that, it was called Great Britain, describing the main island of the British Isles. This terminology map is good to accurately understand the differences. Britain comes from the Roman term Britannia, which was the Latin version of the local Bretani, as the native Britons called it. Bretani itself is supposedly of Celtic origin and could mean the painted ones, referring to the paintings the natives did on their bodies. While the Great has two proposed reasons. One is to distinguish it from the similar sounding but much smaller French region of Brittany, and the other is said to be due to the ego of King James I, who wanted to make it clear that he wasn't just the king of old Roman Britain, but the entire island. When it comes to the constituent countries, the name England is derived from the Old English name Englaland, which means land of the Angles, one of the tribes who settled in Great Britain during the early Middle Ages. The name Scotland is derived from the Roman Latin Scotia, the tribe name Scoti, which applied to all the natives, essentially land of the Scots, while England was land of the Angles. But Wales is different. While Cymru is the Welsh word for Wales and means friends, the word Wales is of Germanic origin, and this was a really confusing explanation that I found. It says that this word, by which most people know the country, comes from a term used by the invading Anglo-Saxons towards the Britons, and it meant foreigners or outsiders, despite the Welsh being native to the land. Back to continental Europe, the Benelux. Let's cover all three in a row. The Dutch government put out a statement last year asking for people to stop using the term holiday Holland and simply refer to them as the Netherlands, because Holland only refers to 2 of the country's 12 provinces, and its usage is therefore technically wrong. So why are there these 3 terms? Dutch, Holland, Netherlands? Historically, all of the Benelux was called the Low Countries, due to their land being mostly below the average sea level. This eventually led to the Dukes of Burgundy, who ruled the area in the 15th century, referring to the territories as the lands over here, for some reason which was then translated as Nederlanden in contemporary Dutch documents. From a regional point of view, Nederland was also the area between the Meuse and Lower Rhine rivers in the late Middle Ages. The fact that a lot of people refer to the country as Holland has to do with those 2 provinces I mentioned. Throughout history, Holland became the most economically and politically important county in the Low Countries region, especially at the time the country was formed, and so the nation was also referred to as such. This would be the same as calling England London. The origin of it derived from the Old Dutch term Oldland, meaning woodland. When it comes to the term Dutch, English-speaking people use the word Dutch to describe people from the Netherlands having to do with the common Germanic descent they share with the Germans, who were also referred to similarly as Deutsch. However, in the Dutch language, a Dutch person is also called a Nederlander, which again I'm for sure mispronouncing. Belgium got its independence from the Netherlands later on in history, but when they became independent, its modern name came from the Latin word Belgium, used in Julius Caesar's book The Gallic Wars, to describe the region in the period around 55 BC, which in turn was named after the native tribe of the Belgae, from a native word similar to Belg, which meant people who swelled with anger. Luxembourg's history as a nation is also somewhat recent, however it began with the construction of Luxembourg Castle in the High Middle Ages. In 963, Siegfried I, Count of the Ardennes, traded some land with the local monks in exchange for an ancient, supposedly Roman fort, named this name which I'm not even gonna try to read, commonly translated as Little Castle. Some people link the origin of the word with Letze, meaning fortification, which may have referred to the remains of that ancient Roman watchtower around the fort of Luxembourg. A town gradually developed, and when becoming a duchy, versions of its name were used for it, then evolving into the modern Luxembourg. Continuing west, Germany. The English word Germany derives from the Latin term Germania, which came into use after Julius Caesar adopted it for the people east of the Rhine River. Essentially, it meant lands where the Germani people live. The original meaning of Germani is disputed, but it did refer to a number of local tribes. In the native German, the country's name is Deutschland, originally Diotische Land, meaning the German lands, which comes from the Old High German word Diotich, meaning of the people, so it would be lands of the people, maybe. Further south is Switzerland. The English name Switzerland means land of the Switzer, an old term which defined the Swiss people. Eventually they changed it to precisely Swiss after the French term. The name comes from the Alemannic Schwyzer, which meant an inhabitant of Schwyz, one of the original cantons and former independent states of the region which first formed the Swiss Confederacy. Apparently Schwyz comes from the Old High German Schwyz, meaning to burn, referring to the area of the forest that was burned and cleared to build. Although sometimes they use the term Confederation Helvetica from the Gaulish tribe the Helveti, which lived in the Swiss regions before the Roman era. And next to it, or almost within it, is the small principality of Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein is a rare case in modern days, but the fact it remains a principality explains it. The name of the country is that of its ruling dynasty, which in turn derives its name from that of Liechtenstein Castle, which means bright stone, from Licht, an obsolete variant of Licht, which is light, and Stein, which means stone. Moving further south, Italy, or the native Italian, Italia. There are many different hypotheses for the origin. One is that it was named after an ancient southern Italian term, vitelliu, meaning land of young cattle. Another is that it would be named after a legendary local king, Italus. It seems either one way or the other it was named by the Greek, who referred to it as such. Within Italy are 2 countries, the Vatican and San Marino. The Vatican city-state is named after Vatican Hill, the geographic location of the state, which itself comes from the name of an Etruscan settlement, a native tribe, Vatica or Vaticum, located in the general area the Romans called Agar Vaticanus, meaning Vatican territory, while San Marino's name comes from a saint, Marinus, who was a stonemason from the island of Rab in today's Croatia. Marinus is said to be the founder of the state, creating a settlement in Monte Titano in 301 AD. Back to big countries, and moving north again, Austria, which is a Latinization of the German word for the country, Österreich, and it comes from the old High German word Osterrhichi, which means Eastern Realm. Austria was initially a prefecture of Bavaria, created in 976. At the time, the Danube basin of Austria was the easternmost extent of Bavaria, which perhaps justifies the eastern meaning of the word. Next, Czechia. Throughout its existence, Czechia has had different names, referring to its regions. The original English name for it is Bohemia, and derives from the Latin Boioaemum, which means home of the Boii, a Gallic tribe. The current English name of Czechia comes from the actual Czech word for that area. The country has been traditionally divided into 3 areas: Bohemia, Moravia, and Czech Silesia. Moving to its former country partner, Slovakia. Slovakia's name means, in theory, the land of the Slavs, Slovensko in the native language. The origin of Slav itself is seemingly unknown. Back north, Poland. The origin of the name Poland derives from the West Slavic tribe of the Polani, who inhabited the region in the mid-6th century. The origin of the name Polani itself derives from the Proto-Slavic word Pol, meaning field. The Polish name for Poland is Polska, which I believe shares the same origin. Onwards to the Nordic countries, starting with Denmark, dividing it into 2 parts, Den or Dan plus Mark. It's debatable what the origin of each part is. Dan might refer to the Dani, a local tribe, or to Dan, a legendary early king of the Danes, although most scholars point to it coming from a word meaning flat land, while Mark would mean woodland or borderland, in the sense of marshes, the name of many border regions in medieval times, perhaps referencing the border forests of Schleswig. Norway has 2 official names, because apparently they have 2 official writing systems. I had no idea about this. They are Norg and Noreg. In English, the name Norway comes from the old word meaning northern way, or way leading into the north, and it seems that the native origin is the same. Sweden's name oddly apparently comes from the Dutch language. As early as 1287, references are found in Middle Dutch referring to a land van Sweden, which meant land of the Swedes, while the native Swedish name Swedish is a compound of the words Svea and Rik, literally meaning realm of the Swedes. The origin of Swedes itself is generally agreed to come from an ancient word similar to Sve, meaning one's own, referring to one's own tribe. When I say ancient words similar to, it's because a lot of these ancient words are modern reconstructions of what we think they used, and trying to represent it with our modern letters. Finland in English apparently is related to the tribe of the Finns, which lived in the area, so it was literally land of the Finns. In Finnish though, the country is named Suomi, and that word's origin is uncertain, although some people say it shares a common origin with the name of the Sami, a group of native people in Lapland, whose source could be the ancient Baltic word Zeme, meaning lowland. Moving on to the 3 Baltic nations, Estonia's name comes from an ancient people, the Aesti, which Roman historian Tacitus wrote lived in the area around the year 98 AD, while early Scandinavian writings refer to the area as Iceland, linked to the Old Norse word Aust, meaning the east, since they are located east of Scandinavia. Latvia's origin is similar. Latvia seems to come from the name of the ancient Latgalians, another regional tribe, while Lithuania or Lietuva has an unknown origin, but there are some possibilities put forward. Some say it would come from Lieta, which would refer to a small local river, the Lietava, which is the general area where the early Lithuanian state first came to be. Another hypothesis is that it would come from the word Laisiai, the name of a local warrior group in the 13th century. Belarus, like we saw at the start of the video, means White Russia. One theory suggests that this name was chosen to describe the part of old Ruthenian lands that had been Christianized early on, as opposed to what was known as Black Ruthenia, which was still seen as pagan, while others say it simply came from the fact the local population wore white clothes, and some even state that white was the color the locals associated with the West, and since it was the western territory of the Rus, it became known as such. Moving to the biggest country in Europe, despite not all of it being in Europe, Russia. The name of Russia is derived from the Rus, a medieval state. However, this name became more prominent in later history, and the country was typically referred to as Ruskaya Zemlya by its people, which can be translated as Russian land or land of Rus. Rus itself comes from the early medieval Rus people, Nordic merchants and warriors who traveled from the Baltic Sea and founded a state centered centered in Novgorod that later became the Kievan Rus. Speaking of Kiev, Ukraine, its name dates back to at least the 12th century, referring to the numerous lands on the border between Polish and Kievan Rus territories, and so it is generally accepted that it means borderland. The name Moldova is derived from the Moldova River. It was in the valley of this river that the original Principality of Moldavia was founded in 1359. According to legend, Prince Dragos named the river after his hunting dog Molta was lost in a river after a hunt, but when it comes to the actual linguistic meaning, it is apparently derived from the Slavic mold, meaning spruce, and ov, which means ownership. Although some also believe it comes from the Old Gothic word molda, meaning dirt, and referring also to the river. Romania's etymology is literally my favorite of all of Europe. It derives from the Roman Latin and means Roman or of Rome. Also known as Wallachia in part of its region, the current name actually seems to date back from the actual Roman Empire. It was first known as Dacia until it was invaded and conquered by the Romans, who displaced or removed most of the native Dacian population. It is said Roman Emperor Trajan took 100,000 people from Roman territories and placed them in what is now Romania to take care of gold mines in the region. Since then, Dacia was Romanized, becoming Romania, and the Romanian language also evolved out of that population. When it comes to Hungary, the H in the name is said to be due to historical associations with the Huns who had settled Hungary prior to the Avars, another people of the region. The rest of the word comes from the Latinized form of Ongroi, a Greek name which was borrowed from the Old Bulgarian Agrinu, in turn borrowed from the Turkish Onogud. It's interesting to see how country names have this evolution between languages, emerging from an initial definition until reaching the current adaptation or translation today. Onogud was the collective name for the tribes who later joined the Bulgar tribal confederacy that ruled the eastern parts of Hungary after the Avars. Internally, the Hungarians called their land Magyar Ország, joining the two words Magyar, which means Hungarian, and Ország, which means country. The word Magyar is taken from the name of one of the 7 major semi-nomadic Hungarian tribes, the Magyari. Magi meant person and Eri meant lineage. Slovenia's name seems to literally mean land of the Slovenes, sharing the origin of Slovakia, and like we saw, the origin of Slav is not determined. Croatia's name derives from the Latin medieval word with the same letters, Croatia. Apparently, the root of the word being a 3rd century Scytho-Sarmatian word, Koroatos. The origin of what it initially meant is uncertain, but most seem to think it was the name of a Slavic tribe of the region, although I found this definition saying Croats in Slavic language mean those who have many lands. On to Bosnia and Herzegovina. The first mention of Bosnia is in the De Administrando Imperio, a handbook written by the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII in the mid-10th century, describing the small land of Bosona. This original name apparently comes from the river that passes through the region, the Bosna, which would derive from Illyrian bas an as, literally meaning running water. When it comes to the second half of the country's name, Herzegovina, it means something like land of the Duke, Herzog's land, from the German word for duke, originating from Bosnian nobleman Stjepan Vucic, whose title was Herzog of Hum and the Coast. And then Serbia. The origin of the name is unclear. Apparently it first derived from the words Serb and Sorb, used to characterize peoples in roughly that area throughout history, but there are literally over a dozen ways these people were referred to, although always something similar. Either way, all of them seem to have the common origin of Srbi, from an old Slavic language, and this would mean family or alliance. Moving on to Mad. The country's English name derives from Venetian and translates as Black Mountain, from the appearance of Mount Lovsen, a Latin name which dates back to at least 1397. The native name is Crna Gora and has the same Black Mountain meaning. The problematic region of Kosovo is named as such in English, or Kosova in the native Albanian, but Kosovo itself has its roots in a Serbian word, Kos, which means black bird. The origin comes from the 1389 Battle of the Kosovo Field, which was named as precisely the Black Bird Field, with the shorter version of that name then being applied to the entire province in 1864. Albanians also refer to Kosovo as Dardania, the name of an ancient kingdom and later a Roman province which covered the territory of modern-day Kosovo. This name is derived from the ancient tribe of the Dardani, possibly related to a local ancient word, Darda, which means pear. Over their western borders is Albania, which has been the name of the country since medieval times as a Latin word. The more than likely origin is the local Illyrian tribe of the Albani. In 150 AD, Greek geographer Ptolemy drafted a map of the region in which he identified a city named Albanopolis in the area, and there was a medieval settlement also called Albanon. Today, Albanians call their country Shqiperia, which gradually replaced the Arberia they used during the Middle Ages. The two terms are popularly interpreted as land of the eagles, perhaps those shown on the Albanian flag. When it comes to North Macedonia, the north refers to its geographical location and was added as a compromise with Greece, where the ancient Hellenic kingdom of Macedonia and the current region of Macedonia are located. I'm not going into the argument of whether or not the country should have this name. The reality is that it does, and so here's the origin. The modern Macedonia derives precisely from the Greek word Macedonia, an antiquity kingdom named after the local Macedonian people. The native term Makedones apparently means tall people, describing the tall nature of the local people. When it comes to one of the world's oldest civilizations, Greece, the name of the country in modern Greek is Ellada. In ancient Greek, it was Hellas. The country is also known as the Hellenic Republic, which comes from the Greek word Hellenikos. In legend, this name comes from the mythological figure Helen, which survived a great flood Zeus used to wipe out humanity, then becoming the founding father of all of the Greek tribes. Eventually, the Romans translated these names into Latin as Gracia and Graecus, from the name of the Graeci, one of the first ancient Greek tribes. The tribe's name was in turn derived from an old word, ger, which meant to grow old. In similar fashion to what we'll see happen for Turkey, Bulgaria's name comes from a tribe of Turkish origin, in this case the Bulgars, who founded the first Bulgarian Empire. Their name is not completely understood and is difficult to trace back to its original meaning, but it is possibly derived from the Turkish word buluga, which meant to mix or shake, and its derivative, bulgak, meant revolt or disorder. The meaning may be further extended to the concept of rebelling. Despite having most of its land in Asia, it reaches into Europe, so I included it here, Turkey. The English name for Turkey comes from the medieval Latin Turkia, meaning land of the Turks. Turks are named as such because they are Turkish people, and it is generally accepted that the name Turk is derived from the old migration term Turuk or Toruk, which means created or strong. Cyprus's name origin is somewhat unknown, but three options are usually presented as possible. 1. The Greek word for cypress tree. 2. The Greek name for the henna tree, and 3. A native Iron Age language's word for copper, due to the large deposits of the metal on the island. Through overseas trade, the island has given its name to the classical Latin word for copper through the phrase metal of Cyprus, later shortened to cuprum. And finally, Malta. The most common etymology is that the word Malta is derived from the Greek word meli, meaning honey. The ancient Greeks called the island Melite, meaning honey sweet, possibly because of Malta's production of honey. The Romans called the island Melita, which can be considered a Latinization of the Greek name. And others suggest that the word Malta comes from the Phoenician word malith, which meant a haven or port. And those were the name origins of all European countries. I left out Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia, which I'll include in the Asia version of this video if you guys are interested. Some of these might not be fully accurate, but they were the best I could find. If you notice any mistakes or have any additional information, just leave a comment below letting me know. Subscribe if you want, and I'll see you next time for more general knowledge.